Well, we're apparently running ahead of schedule. I don't know what that says about the retirement of our colleague in Harlan County or not. Look, a couple things that are going to bring us together. One is we're mourning the loss last night. Two, and all jokes aside, Judge, we're Harlan County and so many of your friends here, us and law enforcement, you have been the statewide judge executive. There's not a ham breakfast or a policy meeting where you're not showing up representing Harlan County, representing your community. And so do me a favor, why don't you join me, and you're going to hear this several times, but join me in honoring our departing colleague. I say departing, not running for re-election, that is. But you hear a lot of words from podiums like this, but I'm talking to folks that work where the rubber meets the road. And I'm talking to folks where it gets a point where happy talk, Mr. Barman, good to see you, sir, where we want to avoid, and I want to avoid in this job, happy talk, right? And so let me say, the last time we were together down I-64 last year, meeting in Lexington, the world looked very different. This job that you hired me to do looked very different. We were coming on the end of the Biden administration, and my remarks are not all about what's going on in Washington, D.C., but they are briefly about how different this job looks now than it did the last time I stood up here in front of you. I call it the Great Pivot. It's what this job looked like when I spent so much of my time, and I talked about it with you last year. The spreadsheet I carried around, the number of times Commonwealth versus, and there was a United States government agency on the other side, EPA being most common. And that was the job. In law enforcement, you go to where the threats are, and the threats, until the Great Pivot, were to our way of life, to our energy sector, to so many jobs still in this Commonwealth, and for those of us who are dads of girls, the threat was not only girls' sports, but educational opportunities for our girls. We were winning. We were winning in court. We were pushing back on that dynamic. But the reality is, litigation is a holding pattern. Elections have consequences. And so I want to take you something very far to where we sit now, and I'll apologize in advance, because where I'm going to take you to is about 4,000 miles from here in Yuma, Arizona. Yuma, Arizona, a few months ago, I stood on the southwest border, the Yuma sector in Yuma County, right on the Mexican-U.S. border. Now, I didn't know a lot about Yuma before I went, but Yuma is a town about the size of Hardin County. It's about 110,000 people. Yuma was one of the busiest sectors of the U.S. border until President Trump was elected. We were briefed by those real heroes of law enforcement from the U.S. Border Patrol that just walked us through what they had seen there. And it was me and about a dozen other attorneys general from across the country. And what we were told was, in the dark days in these previous years, Yuma, a town of 110,000, think about this, Hardin County, on a daily basis had 1,500 people crossing that border. 1,500 people who were sick, 1,500 people who needed services, 1,500 people, the women, many of whom need assistance from the Rape Crisis Center, because there was a toll you paid the cartels to cross the border, and a pretty horrific one if you happen to be a woman or happen to be a child. And so we then went from the border, and yeah, we need that structure, but the conversation wasn't all about the wall itself. You could look into Mexico and see this east-west highway where the cartels would drop off these folks. We went and sat with folks who had your jobs, many of you, in Yuma. The county judge, the sheriff, the hospital administrator, $25 million worth of uncompensated care that the hospitals had to spend. They did it because they had a duty to care for every one of those out-of-status folks as they would you or me or a resident. We heard from the Rape Crisis Centers and the Hunger Coalition in trying to feed folks or even get diapers for moms that were having babies. We heard from the ag sector that talked about the impact. Most of our lettuce that we eat is from that neck of the woods. But here's something that, and I take you to a dark place at a dark time, because the difference, and I'm not going to leave you with a lot of math, but the difference when I talk about the Great Pivot and where we are now versus where I where we were when I last stood here is we've gone from 1,500 people a day crossing that border to an average of 4. Not 4,000 or 400 people, but 4 people crossing that border. As your chief law enforcement officer, I have a partner in Washington, D.C. now. I have a partner on issues that you care about. I have a partner on issues not only as we support our federal partners in the immigration space, but as we try to mitigate. And we celebrate every life as we've reduced the overdose in this Commonwealth, the overdose rate last year. But every one of you know a family. Every one of you know a family that we've lost recently, that have lost someone, that have had an impact, or just the conversations you have about the expenses you have within your jails. We know this is the greatest challenge facing our Commonwealth. And I have a partner as your chief law enforcement officer in this current present. It's a very different dynamic than what it used to. And I wanted to share you that. It's not all policy papers and data. I wanted you to know what it looked like on our southwest border then versus now. And I will tell you, the difference maker is not the wall. We need it, of course, it just makes sense. The difference maker is not aggressive prosecutions of the traffickers, and certainly we need to go after them. Friends, the difference maker is what the president signed on day one. It's just an executive order. The difference maker that went from 1,500 to 4 is a scratch of a pen on an executive order. It shows the power of elections having consequences. The difference is now we detain those until they see a judge. It is not so-called catch and release. That's the difference maker in executive order. Elections have consequences, and my job looks very different. I get to spend my time working with you, focusing more of our resources, less on that spreadsheet suing our own government, and more after going after trigger pullers in places like right here in Louisville, trigger pullers that still here in Louisville have created an environment where we have a violent crime rate that's way too high. And before we all nod and say, well, thank God I'm not in government in Jefferson County, we also know that what goes on here doesn't stay here. I could talk to so many of you so many of your shootings, so many of the dope that's coming into your communities, this can be in the east or this can be far down in the west, has a nexus to here. You talk to your post commanders, has a nexus to here. So goes Louisville, so goes the rest of our Commonwealth. And I fully believe that as I spend time in this role and as we try to mitigate what's happening here so that we can have an impact in mitigating what's happening in your counties. We've spent a lot of time these last few years, not that far from where we're sitting right now, hearing mantras of saying people's names. We heard a lot about that in 2020. And if there's nothing else you remember from my couple of minutes with you this morning, I want you to remember 2 names. I want you to remember the name of Powell County Sheriff Steve Bennett and Deputy Sheriff Arthur Briscoe. Steve Bennett and Arthur Briscoe. These men, you may not have heard a lot about them. Some of you from Powell County certainly have, and adjacent counties in East Kentucky. This was the sheriff of Powell County in 1992 and his deputy. This was a father of a high school age kid, the other a father of a 4-year-old and a kindergartner. These 2 men were assassinated. They were assassinated in 1992. After receiving due process, their shooter, a man by the name of Ralph Bays, remains on death row here in this Commonwealth, 1992. So here's what I leave with you. Part of the job that I'm asked to do when I took that oath, same one that you did, was to enforce the law of this Commonwealth. And until our General Assembly changes it, the ultimate punishment in this Commonwealth is the death penalty. And as long as I'm Attorney General, and as long as our team is in place, we will fight. We will fight to enforce the law of this Commonwealth. Ralph Bays, who killed this sheriff's deputy, who killed this sheriff, never a question of mental capacity, never a question of who done it. He admitted to it. He stood over them both and put 3 rounds from an SKS into both of their backs, one of their heads. He has been on death row since 1992. And a few months ago, I asked Governor Beshear to sign a death warrant for Ralph Bays. I'm not here because we need the General Assembly to do anything any different. We don't need a new law. I'm not asking it to ask for anything in terms of a new reg or funding. We don't need that. There is no impediment to Governor Beshear signing a death warrant for Ralph Bays. Powell County Sheriff Steve Bennett and Arthur Briscoe. Remember those names. The governor of this Commonwealth needs to enforce the law of this Commonwealth. This won't be the last time you hear this from me. We'll keep pushing. The governor disagrees. He has no reason to disagree. As the chief law enforcement officer of the Commonwealth, I've advised him otherwise. There may be certain limiting factors to why someone who's seeking another job wouldn't want to sign a death warrant in this current environment, in this Democrat Party. But I'll leave it to the governor to defend his position. He'll be defending that in Franklin Circuit Court. This is just the kind of issue that, unfortunately, we need to bring before the court. We have filed that a week ago, asking the judge in Franklin Circuit Court to rule, to direct the governor of this Commonwealth to do his job. And so those are the matters that I get to spend my time and our energy on when we have the ability to pivot following that outcome last November. I want to leave one other thing with you. I talk a lot about the law enforcement piece, the enforcement piece of going after those that bring that poison into our Commonwealth. But it takes two other legs to the stool. We know that. It's the treatment side as well, but it's also prevention. I'm pleased to announce that we have over $1 billion. You know this because you've received half of it, or will. Over $1 billion of opioid settlement money. And we're never going to replace that seat at the kitchen table or that space next to you on the pew. We're not going to be able to do that. We know it, but we can mitigate this relying on you and your creativity and your ideas on how we spend this money. This is not a Frankfurt-centric idea. We're relying on you to spend that money in a creative way to help mitigate what we've seen from the west to the east. Now, half of that money comes to the Opioid Abatement Commission. Also, we're getting great ideas in how we spend some of that money. Those of you who may be at the UK game, U of L game last night, you may have seen some content from a campaign called Better Without It. If you haven't, well, I don't want to be ageist, but most of us probably haven't or won't because we're not targeting you. We're spending about $4 million of this money, partnering with folks like Coach Pope, talk about being proud. I didn't think I'd be a bigger fan of Trent Noah until I met him and get to see the caliber of man he is. Harlan County's finest, someone that's partnering with us on this effort. We know the power of Big Blue, and we're partnering with U of L and Western as well. We know, and I know this from a kid growing up in Western Kentucky. As a kid, if Richie Farmer looked at the camera and said to buy a certain brand of toothpaste, we were loading up on the toothpaste. We know the power of Big Blue. And so to see Trent Noah look at the camera, on a camera again, that's showing up on a 13 or 14-year-old's phone that typically doesn't have the most positive content, and you see Trent Noah saying, hey, you want to wear this jersey? You're better off without it. You're better off with a clean life. We see Coach Pope say, you want to play for me? You're better off without it. And the Pollyanna that I viewed this as, the kind of social worky that a law enforcement officer, that a cop saw this as, the data says it works. We're not going to save every life, but there are kids that are going to listen to the right positive message from the right influencer. And there's no more powerful influencer than those that wear the blue. So stay tuned. Those of you that haven't seen this, talk to your kids and your grandkids about it. There's going to be some great content coming out that we rolled out starting yesterday. Better without it, rather. I know we're ahead of time, and I want to make sure we stay there. Judge, I appreciate the hospitality. I want to end with saying, one, that portal for how we evaluate, how the commission evaluates great ideas to spend that money, to invest that money as good stewards, that portal is open now. They are taking and seeking good ideas, and I don't use the term steward lightly. And for those of us with faith, steward has a real powerful connotation. We want to grow. We want to be responsible about those dollars because you know and I know that that's blood money. Those opioid dollars, that's blood money. And we have to spend that as good stewards. We want to do it in a way that's effective, that has an impact, which is why we're doing something new with this Better Without It effort that's just never been done in any state in the nation. It's been done at the county level. In Florida, we're working with a team, Broward County and others. The data says they've had some great impact on prevention. And so my job now is to work with them and try to save lives. I'll end with where I will start, not too creatively, but just to say thank you. It may not be that creative from a podium like this, but it's no less sincere. I get to now, in this role, peer behind the curtain a little bit. I get to see just a bit of what you deal with. Judges and magistrates and commissioners, I get to see what you deal with. And this Commonwealth is well served by the men, the women sitting on your left and your right. And as somebody that has a duty to be the Attorney General for every one of your counties, I just want to say thank you for being such extraordinary leaders. Thank you for being willing to step into this fight. This is not glamorous. You know that for every fiscal court, every commission meeting. Thank you for continuing to be in the fight. Thank you for being such good stewards of this Commonwealth. God bless what you do. Thank you so much.